There was a stretch in the 60s and 70s when certain bands seemed impossible to escape, filling stadiums, topping every chart, and winning the industry's biggest awards, only to disappear so completely from the conversation that most people today couldn't name a single one of their songs. Some of these acts outsold artists who are still household names, and yet somehow history barely remembers them at all. So today, we're counting down 12 bands from the 60s and 70s that dominated and then vanished from history. Number 12, Strawberry Alarm Clock, at the very top of the Billboard Hot 100 in November of 1967, with Incense and Peppermints, a psychedelic pop single that became one of the defining sounds of the Summer of Love era almost overnight. The song's success was so sudden that the band's lineup was still shifting even as it climbed the charts, with the actual lead vocal on the recording reportedly performed by a friend of the band, rather than any official member, since nobody had settled on a permanent singer yet at the time it was recorded. Follow-up singles like Tomorrow and Sit with the Guru failed to generate anywhere near the same reaction, and the band's momentum evaporated almost as quickly as it had arrived. Today, insensibly on classic 60s compilations. But the band responsible for one of the year's biggest hits has almost entirely dropped out of mainstream rock history. The band had originally formed under a different name before settling on Strawberry Alarm Clock, a deliberately playful choice that fit right in with the era's fondness for whimsical psychedelic branding. Even at the height of their success, the band struggled with record label disputes over songwriting credit and royalties. Disputes that only added to the difficulty of building any lasting career once the initial wave of attention started to fade. Number 11. The Buckinghams. The Buckinghams came out of Chicago and reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in February of 1967 with Kind of a Drag, a tightly arranged pop-rock single built around horns and sharp vocal harmonies that stood out from much of what else was on the radio that year. They followed it with a run of additional hits within the same 12 months, including Don't You Care and Mercy, 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 giving them one of the most concentrated bursts of chart success of any American band during the entire decade. Internal management disputes and a rapidly changing music landscape slowed their momentum by 1968, and within a couple of years the band had largely faded from national radio. Despite once being one of the most played American groups of 1967, the Buckinghams rarely come up today even in conversations specifically about that year's biggest hits. The band's horn-driven sound, arranged with help from producer James William Guercio, who went on to work with Chicago just a couple of years later, gave their singles a polish that stood apart from much of the garage and psychedelic rock dominating the same charts. That same producer's later success with a band pursuing a strikingly similar horn-based sound has only added to the sense that the Buckinghams were, in some ways, a dress rehearsal for a style that would go on to greater and more lasting fame under a different name. Number 10. Gary Puckett and the Union Gap. Gary Puckett and the Union Gap put together one of the most dominant short runs of any act in the late 1960s, landing 4 singles inside the Billboard Top 10 within about 18 months, including Young Girl and Lady Willpower, both of which reached number 2 nationally. The band performed in Civil War-era military uniforms as part of their stage presentation, a visual gimmick that made them instantly recognizable during their brief but intense period of chart dominance. By 1970, changing tastes and a lack of comparable new material caused their commercial momentum to collapse almost as fast as it had built, and Puckett eventually stepped away from the band to pursue a solo career that never matched the group's earlier success. Considering how thoroughly they dominated the charts for that short stretch, the band's near-total absence from today's classic rock conversation is one of the more striking vanishing acts of the era. Puckett's powerful, dramatic vocal delivery was central to the group's appeal, giving even fairly simple pop arrangements an emotional weight that helped them stand out on crowded top 40 radio playlists. The band's rapid rise and equally rapid decline happened almost entirely within a 2-year window. An unusually compressed career arc even by the standards of an industry known for short-lived pop success stories. The military-style uniforms, while eye-catching at the time, later drew some criticism for feeling out of step with the era's broader countercultural mood. A mismatch that may have made the band feel dated faster than acts whose image evolved more naturally alongside changing tastes. Number 9. The Cowsills. The Cowsills were a real family band made up of siblings and their mother, and their run of hits between 1967 and 1969, including The Rain, The Park, and Other Things, and the title song from the musical Hair, made them one of the most recognizable pop acts in the country during that stretch. Their wholesome, family-based image reportedly served as a direct inspiration for the television show The Partridge Family, a fictional band that ended up far more culturally remembered today than the real family that inspired it. Despite multiple top 10 hits and heavy television exposure, changing musical tastes and internal family strain caused the group's commercial fortunes to decline sharply by the start of the 1970s. It's a strange twist of pop culture history that the sitcom family loosely modeled after them remains widely remembered while the actual band has largely faded from public memory. The Cowsills siblings, along with their mother Barbara, who joined the group's harmonies at a record label's request, presented a genuinely wholesome image that television producers found instantly appealing when developing a fictional show around a similar concept. Ironically, the real band was reportedly considered for the actual television role before producers ultimately decided to cast actors instead, a decision that ended up giving the fictional version far greater and more lasting fame than the family who had inspired it in the first place. The Cowsills continued performing together in various configurations for years afterward, and later generations of the family have kept the group's legacy alive through occasional reunions and documentaries, even as their original chart success remains far less remembered than the sitcom their story helped inspire. Number 8. Vanilla Fudge. Vanilla Fudge built their reputation on slowed-down, heavily orchestrated reworkings of existing songs, and their dramatic cover of You Keep Me Hangin' On, released in 1967, became a major hit that reached the Billboard Top 10 and introduced a wider audience to a genuinely different approach to arranging rock music. Musicians across the emerging hard rock and progressive rock scenes cited the band as a direct influence in the years that followed, crediting their heavy, extended arrangements as an early blueprint for where rock music was heading next. Despite that outsized influence, Vanilla Fudge never landed another single with anywhere near the same commercial reach, and the band's lineup shifted repeatedly, before effectively dissolving by the early 1970s. Their influence on other, far more famous bands has been discussed extensively by musicians and critics over the decades, even as the band's own name has largely slipped out of mainstream conversation. Members of the band went on to found or join other notable acts later in their careers, including bassist Tim Boggart and drummer Carmine Appice, who formed the band Cactus and later worked with guitarist Jeff Beck, carrying Vanilla Fudge's heavy, dramatic sensibility into other projects that, in some cases, achieved more lasting recognition than the original group itself. The band's approach to radically reworking existing material, rather than writing entirely original songs, was still a fairly novel concept in 1967, and their commercial success helped normalize the idea that a cover version could become just as significant a statement as an original composition. Number 7. Iron Butterfly. Iron Butterfly's 1968 album Inagata da Vida, anchored by its 17-minute title track, became one of the best-selling rock albums of the entire decade, eventually becoming one of the first albums in history to be certified platinum by the Recording Industry Association of America. The song's extended instrumental passages and heavy, droning organ line made it a defining piece of early hard rock, regularly played in full on FM radio stations throughout the late 60s and well into the following decade. Despite that massive commercial footprint, the band struggled to build any lasting momentum beyond that single album, with lineup changes and shifting musical trends eroding their audience within just a few years. Today, even listeners who instantly recognize the song's opening organ riff often have no idea which band actually recorded it. A strange fate for a group that once had one of the best-selling rock records in the country. The song's title itself came from a slurred, misheard pronunciation of the phrase, "in the Garden of Eden," an origin story the band members later confirmed happened almost by accident during an early rehearsal. That same organ-driven sound would go on to influence heavy rock and early metal bands throughout the following decade, even as Iron Butterfly's own commercial fortunes declined sharply once the initial wave of interest in the album eventually settled. Number 6. The Grassroots. The Grassroots quietly became one of the most successful hit-making machines of the late 1960s and early 1970s, landing more than a dozen singles in the Billboard Top 40, including Let's Live for Today and their biggest hit, Midnight Confessions, which reached number 5 in 1968. The band's lineup changed considerably over the years, built around a rotating cast of songwriters and musicians working under the same group name rather than a single fixed set of members, which gave them remarkable consistency on the charts even as their actual roster shifted behind the scenes. That same structure, however, likely worked against their long-term cultural memory, since there was never one clearly defined lineup for audiences to strongly associate with the band's identity the way listeners did with more stable groups. Despite selling tens of millions of records across their run, the Grassroots remain one of the most commercially successful, yet culturally forgotten acts of the entire era. The name itself began as a concept dreamed up by songwriters and producers before any specific musicians were formally attached to it, with different sets of session players and touring musicians cycling through the lineup at various points depending on whether the group was recording or performing live. That flexible, almost corporate approach to keeping the hits coming meant the band could weather personnel changes without losing commercial momentum. But it also meant audiences never formed the same personal attachment to specific faces that helped cement other groups from the same period into lasting cultural memory. Number 5. Paul Revere and the Raiders. Paul Revere and the Raiders became a genuine national phenomenon in the mid-1960s, driven partly by their frequent appearances on the television show Where the Action Is, which turned them into one of the most visible bands in the country during that stretch, complete with revolutionary war-themed costumes that made them instantly recognizable. Hits like Kicks and Hungry kept them near the top of the charts throughout the decade, and the band continued its commercial success into the following decade with Indian Reservation, which reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1971. Despite that remarkably long run of hits spanning both decades, heavy television exposure at the time didn't translate into lasting cultural memory the way it did for some of their contemporaries, and the band's name rarely comes up today outside of dedicated classic rock circles. Few acts from the era combined that level of mainstream visibility with such a thorough disappearance from modern conversation. The band's frontman and namesake, Paul Revere, had actually built a career running a small chain of drive-in restaurants before turning to music full-time, a detail that made his later transformation into one of the country's most visible rock and roll performers all the more unusual. Their heavy rotation on daytime television meant they were arguably more visible to the average American household during the mid-1960s than many bands that are far better remembered today, making their eventual fade from the broader cultural conversation particularly striking, given how thoroughly they had once saturated the airwaves. The band's willingness to lean fully into their historical costume gimmick, long after many contemporaries had moved toward a more serious rock image, may have ultimately worked against them once musical tastes shifted toward a grittier, less costume-driven aesthetic in the years that followed. Number 4. The Fifth Dimension. The the Fifth Dimension became one of the most decorated vocal groups of the era, winning multiple Grammy Awards including Record of the Year in 1970, for their medley Aquarius/Let the Sunshine In, pulled from the musical Hair and turned into one of the defining anthems of the year. The group followed that success with additional #1 hits, including Wedding Bell Blues, blending pop, soul, and orchestral arrangements into a sound that dominated radio for several consecutive years. Despite that run of major awards and chart-topping singles, the band's profile faded steadily through the 1970s as musical tastes shifted, and today their catalog rarely receives the same ongoing radio rotation given to other major vocal groups from the same period. It remains one of the more surprising cases of an act with genuine Grammy-level critical recognition still slipping largely out of mainstream cultural memory. The group's polished, orchestral sound and tight 5-part harmonies set them apart from most rock acts of the period, giving them a broader crossover appeal that reached adult contemporary audiences as easily as it reached younger pop listeners. Members of the group later pursued solo careers and other projects with varying degrees of success. But none of those individual efforts came close to recapturing the sheer scale of recognition the group achieved together during their peak years at the very end of the 1960s and into the early 1970s. Number 3. The Rascals. The Rascals, originally billed as the Young Rascals, landed 3 separate #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100 between 1966 and 1968, including Good Lovin', Groovin', and People Got to Be Free, giving them one of the most dominant chart runs of any American rock band during that stretch. Their blend of blue-eyed soul and rock earned them a devoted following and eventual induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame decades later, a recognition that acknowledged just how influential their sound had been on the artists who came after them. Despite 3 #1 hits and that eventual institutional recognition, the band's name carries far less everyday recognition today than acts with considerably smaller chart success during the same period. It's a clear example of a band whose actual commercial dominance never quite translated into the same lasting household name status enjoyed by many of their contemporaries. The band had originally performed under the name Young Rascals, before dropping the Young once the members felt they'd outgrown the more teen-oriented framing. A small but telling shift that mirrored their broader move toward more socially conscious material as the decade progressed. Their later work increasingly touched on themes of civil rights and social change, giving songs like People Got to Be Free a weight beyond typical pop radio fare, even as that same shift in direction may have made their later catalog less immediately accessible to casual listeners revisiting the era decades afterward. Number 2. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Blood, Sweat, and Tears combined rock with jazz-influenced horn arrangements to create a sound that dominated both the charts and the award circuit by the end of the 1960s, culminating in their self-titled second album winning the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1970, beating out records by far more commercially remembered artists that same year. That album produced 3 separate top 5 singles, including Spinning Wheel and When I Die, an unusually consistent run of hits from a single record during that era. Despite that critical and commercial peak, internal lineup changes and a shifting musical landscape steadily eroded the band's presence through the rest of the decade. And today, they're frequently overshadowed in classic rock retrospectives by other horn-driven bands that emerged around the same time. Winning music's biggest album award of the year wasn't enough to keep Blood, Sweat, and Tears part of the ongoing conversation about that era's most important bands. The band had actually gone through a significant lineup shift right before recording their award-winning album, with founding member Al Kooper departing and vocalist David Clayton Thomas stepping in, a change that ended up defining the sound most listeners associate with the group's biggest hits. That same lineup instability continued for years afterward, with members cycling in and out at a pace that made it difficult for audiences to form a consistent picture of who the band actually was, even during the years they were racking up major awards and chart-topping singles. Catch a painted pony, let the spinning wheel turn. Number 1. Grand Funk Railroad. Grand Funk Railroad became one of the biggest live draws in the country during the early 1970s, famously selling out New York's Shea Stadium within 72 hours in 1971, a pace that outstripped even the previous benchmark set by the Beatles at the same venue years earlier. Despite that level of stadium-filling popularity, the band faced consistent criticism from music journalists throughout their career, creating a strange gap between their massive commercial success and their critical reputation at the time. They eventually landed 2 #1 singles, We're an American Band in 1973, and their cover of The Locomotion in 1974, cementing their commercial dominance even as critics continued to dismiss them. Despite selling millions of records and headlining some of the largest venues in the country during their peak, Grand Funk Railroad rarely gets mentioned today, alongside the other major rock acts of the early 70s, making their disappearance from the standard classic rock narrative one of the most dramatic on this entire list. Critics at the time often dismissed the band's music as simplistic compared to more musically ambitious acts emerging around the same period, a gap between popular reception and critical opinion that may partly explain why later retrospectives of the era's most important rock music tend to skip over them. Their manager, Terry Knight, played a major role in shaping the band's aggressive touring schedule and promotional strategy during their peak years, though a bitter legal dispute between the band and Knight not long after their commercial peak added further turbulence to a career that had already been defined by extremes on both ends. That wraps up our countdown of bands from the 60s and 70s who once completely dominated the charts, the awards shows, and the biggest stages in the country, only to fade almost entirely from how we talk about that era today. Some of these acts sold more records or won more awards than bands who are still household names now, and yet somehow their own place in the conversation never held the same way. Every one of them left behind a genuine mark on the music of their time, even if that mark isn't always remembered the way it probably should be. Looking back across the whole list, it's worth remembering that chart dominance and lasting cultural memory have never actually been the same thing, and plenty of genuinely massive careers from this era simply never made that second, longer-lasting leap into ongoing recognition. If any of these brought back a memory, let us know in the comments which one surprised you the most. And if you enjoyed this look back at music's forgotten giants, give the video a like and subscribe for more nostalgic countdowns like this one.